We're grateful for having such amazing viewers like you. Tell us, which part of the world are you watching from today? Morning coffee or evening wind down? Share below. Now let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Fractures. Dominic Valente stared out the window of their rental car as the Romanian countryside blurred past. The ancient villages with their terracotta roofs nestled between rolling green hills should have been picturesque, but the tension inside the vehicle had been suffocating for hours. "You're being ridiculous," Audrey said, not looking up from her phone. "It's just dinner with Preston and the girls. He has connections that could help your career too, if you'd bother trying to be social for once." Dom tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Preston Whitfield. The name alone made his jaw clench. The man had been orbiting Audrey like a satellite since they'd arrived in Bucharest 3 days ago, along with Audrey's circle of friends, Naomi, Veronica, and Brooke, a traveling entourage that turned what should have been their anniversary trip into a circus. "Our anniversary trip," Dom said quietly. "That's what this was supposed to be, remember?" Audrey sighed dramatically. "God, we've been married 5 years. Is celebrating every single year really necessary? Besides, when Preston mentioned he was coming to Romania the same week, it just made sense to coordinate. His yacht party on the Black Sea was incredible. You would have enjoyed it if you hadn't been such a killjoy." Dom bit his tongue, focusing on the winding road. Their marriage had been deteriorating for months, but he'd hoped this trip might rekindle something. Instead, it was becoming painfully clear that his wife preferred the company of her jet-setting friends and the charismatic Preston. The village of Viskry emerged ahead, a tiny, ancient Saxon settlement known for its fortified church. It wasn't on their original itinerary, but Dom had suggested the detour, hoping for a moment of peace away from Preston and Audrey's friends. "Why are we stopping in this dump?" Audrey complained as Dom parked near the village center. "There's nothing to post about here. No one's going to care about some old buildings." "That's the UNESCO World Heritage Fortified Church," Dom explained, his passion for architecture momentarily overriding his frustration. "The craftsmanship is exceptional. Spare me the history lesson." Audrey cut him off, checking her makeup in the visor mirror. "Let's make this quick. We're meeting everyone at that vineyard in 2 hours." Dom stepped out of the car, inhaling the crisp autumn air. At 35, he'd built a respected career as an architectural preservation specialist, which had brought him to projects across Europe. It was how he'd met Audrey 6 years ago, when she was traveling through Italy with friends. Her vivacity and beauty had captivated him then, but somewhere along the way, their paths had diverged. As they walked through the village, Dom's phone buzzed with a message from Gabriela Constantinescu, his Romanian colleague who'd recommended several historical sites for their trip. "The church at Viskry is magnificent. The Prince of Wales owns property there. He fell in love with the village's authenticity. Hope you enjoy it as much as he does." Dom smiled slightly, appreciating Gabriela's enthusiasm for her country's heritage. They'd worked together on a restoration project in Bucharest last year, and he respected her expertise. Perhaps in another life. "Who's that?" Audrey demanded, peering over his shoulder. "Just Gabriela, giving me some information about the village." "Of course," Audrey said coldly. "Your work wife. Always so helpful." Dom pocketed his phone. "She's a colleague, Audrey. A professional contact. Is that why you light up every time she texts?" "Don't think I haven't noticed." Dom stopped walking. "That's unfair. I've never been anything but faithful to you despite." He caught himself. "Despite what?" Audrey challenged, eyes narrowing. Dom hesitated, then decided it was time. "Despite how close you've become with Preston. The late-night drinks. The private tours of Bucharest that conveniently didn't include me." Audrey's laugh was brittle. "You're paranoid. Preston is a friend who happens to know Romania well. Unlike you, he doesn't bore everyone with architectural details or waste time in backward villages like this." They had reached the fortified church, its stone walls rising impressively against the sky. Dom paid for their tickets, though Audrey barely glanced at the structure as they entered. Inside, the church was cool and quiet. Dom moved through the space reverently, admiring the craftsmanship that had endured for centuries. Audrey trailed behind, tapping impatiently on her phone. Preston says they've moved dinner to 7, she announced. He's bringing someone he wants you to meet. A developer looking for a historical consultant in Switzerland. Switzerland? Dom turned. What are you talking about? Audrey shrugged. Preston has a project there. He thought you might be interested. I have no plans to work in Switzerland, Dom said firmly. And I'd appreciate being consulted before you and Preston arrange my career. God, you're so ungrateful. Audrey snapped. Preston's trying to help you, and you act like it's some kind of insult. A handful of tourists glanced their way, and Dom lowered his voice. This is exactly the problem, Audrey. You make decisions with him that affect us, without even asking me. Because you just say no. Audrey's voice echoed in the ancient space. You're comfortable in your little world of old buildings and dust. Meanwhile, Preston's offering you an opportunity most architects would kill for. I doubt that, Dom muttered. And I'd like to know exactly what Preston gets out of recommending me. Audrey's face flushed. He's being generous. Something you wouldn't understand. Dom stared at his wife, suddenly seeing her as if for the first time. The woman he'd fallen in love with, the spontaneous, vibrant traveler with genuine curiosity about the world, had been replaced by someone obsessed with status and appearances, someone who treated him with barely disguised contempt. I need some air, he said, turning toward the exit. I'll meet you back at the car in 15 minutes. Outside, Dom walked to a stone wall overlooking the village. He pulled out his phone to text Gabriella a question about the church's history, but hesitated. Audrey's accusation about his work wife wasn't entirely baseless. Though he'd never crossed any lines, he enjoyed Gabriella's company in a way he no longer enjoyed his wife's. He put the phone away without sending a message. Instead, he stared at the peaceful village, knowing that when they reached the car, he needed to have a serious conversation with Audrey about their future. When he returned, Audrey was already in the passenger seat, furiously texting. Dom slid behind the wheel, took a deep breath, and turned to face her. Audrey, we need to talk. This isn't working. She looked up, her expression unexpectedly calm. No, it isn't. She glanced at her watch. But this conversation will have to wait. We're already late for dinner. As Dom started the car, he didn't notice Audrey sending one final text. He knows something. Time for Plan B. Chapter 2. Abandoned. The drive to the vineyard passed in tense silence. Dom's mind raced through options, perhaps a trial separation when they returned home, or a last attempt at counseling. Deep down, he suspected it was too late for either. The Varteju vineyard sprawled across a hillside, its modern glass-walled restaurant overlooking rows of grapevines. Dom parked among a collection of expensive rental cars, noting Preston's distinctive silver Audi. Try to be civil, Audrey said as they approached the entrance. Preston's connections could still be valuable, regardless of what happens with us. Dom stopped walking. What's that supposed to mean? Before Audrey could answer, the restaurant doors swung open, and Preston emerged, arms spread wide. At 38, Preston Whitfield exuded the confidence of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. His tailored linen suit and carefully styled hair projected wealth and taste. The Valentes arrive at last. Preston called out. We were about to send a search party. Audrey transformed instantly, her sullen demeanor replaced by a dazzling smile as she kissed Preston on both cheeks. Sorry we're late. Dom insisted on a detour to some ancient church. Preston's eyes met Dom's, a hint of mockery in his gaze. Ah, the consummate professional. Always working, even on vacation. Some of us have to, Dom replied evenly. Preston laughed too loudly. Come inside. The Fidiasca Negra is extraordinary, and Chef Dragomir has prepared a feast. The restaurant's interior was sophisticated and minimalist. At a large table by the window sat Audrey's friends, Naomi Wells, Veronica Tate, and Brooke Montgomery, along with two men Dom didn't recognize. Ladies, look who I found, Preston announced. The women greeted Audrey enthusiastically while offering Dom perfunctory nods. Naomi, a sharp-featured blonde with calculating eyes, patted the seat beside her for Audrey. Dom found himself positioned at the far end of the table, beside one of the strangers. Flynn Cooper, the man introduced himself, extending his hand. Preston's associate from Zurich. Dominic Valente, Dom replied, suddenly understanding why he'd been invited. This was the Swiss developer Audrey had mentioned. As wine flowed and appetizers appeared, Dom observed the dynamics around the table. Audrey leaned close to Preston, laughing at his every word. Veronica and Brooke kept glancing at Dom with expressions that ranged from pity to disdain. Naomi watched everyone with sharp eyes, occasionally whispering to Audrey. Flynn leaned toward Dom. Preston speaks highly of your work, preserving historical properties. We have a project in Interlaken, a 19th century hotel we're converting to luxury residences. We need someone who can maintain its historical integrity while modernizing the interior. I'm not currently taking new projects, Dom said, his eyes fixed on Preston's hand resting casually on Audrey's shoulder. Flynn followed his gaze. I see. He lowered his voice. For what it's worth, that's been going on for months. Since London, at least. Dom's glass stopped halfway to his lips. Excuse me? Flynn looked uncomfortable. Sorry. I thought you knew. They weren't exactly discreet at the Mayfair property launch. The London trip. 4 months ago, Audrey had joined him for the first few days of a restoration consultation, then stayed on alone while he returned for an emergency at another project. She'd been different since then, distant, critical, constantly on her phone. Dom set down his glass carefully, pieces falling into place. The Swiss job offer suddenly made sense, a convenient way to get him out of the picture. When does the Interlaken project begin? He asked Flynn casually. Next month. Why? Having second thoughts. Just curious about the timeline. Dom's mind was racing. Would Preston be involved directly? Flynn snorted. Preston's never directly involved in anything that might carry liability. He creates the connections, takes his percentage, and moves on to the next deal. The Interlaken property technically belongs to a holding company registered in Cyprus. Very creative accounting. Dom nodded, filing away this information. And how do you fit in? Flynn swirled his wine. I handle local complications. Make problems disappear. He studied Dom. Like I said, Preston speaks highly of your professional skills. Less enthusiastically about your personal situation. Before Dom could respond, Preston tapped his glass for attention. Friends, a toast. To new ventures and exciting partnerships. Some professional, his eyes flicked between Audrey and Dom, and some decidedly more pleasurable. Everyone laughed except Dom, who took a long sip of wine to mask his expression. As the main course arrived, he watched Audrey whisper something to Naomi, who then passed a message to Veronica and Brooke. All 3 women glanced at him, then quickly looked away. They know, Dom realized. They've all known. The remainder of dinner passed in a blur. Dom answered Flynn's questions about architecture automatically, his mind documenting every interaction between Audrey and Preston, every exchange glance with her friends. By dessert, a cold clarity had replaced his initial shock. When Preston invited everyone to continue the evening at a club in the next town, Dom saw his opportunity. You all go ahead, he said. I'll settle the bill and join you later. Preston waved dismissively. It's taken care of. Consider it a down payment on our future collaboration. Then I need to make a call about that church restoration, Dom insisted. Poor reception inside. I'll catch up. Audrey barely acknowledged him as the group moved toward the exit. Naomi, however, hung back. Don't bother catching up, she said quietly. Nobody wants you there anyway. Especially Audrey. Dom met her gaze steadily. How long have you known? Naomi smiled thinly. About Preston and Audrey? Since the beginning. They have history from before you were in the picture. She patted his arm condescendingly. Don't take it personally. Preston can offer her things you can't. Excitement, connections, freedom from your constant disappointment. With that parting shot, she sauntered after the others. Through the window, Dom watched them pile into 2 cars. Preston's Audi and a rented SUV driven by Brooke. Audrey didn't look back as they pulled away. Dom remained at the table, finishing his wine. The restaurant had nearly emptied, and the staff were beginning to clean up. He paid for an extra bottle and took it outside to the terrace overlooking the vineyard. The autumn evening was cool, stars emerging in the darkening sky. He pulled out his phone. No messages from Audrey. No surprise there. He opened his recent calls and saw Gabriella's number. His finger hovered over it, then moved to his banking app instead. He needed to assess his financial situation before deciding his next steps. What he saw made him freeze. His primary checking account, which had held over 50,000 euros yesterday, now showed a balance of 121 euros. His savings had similarly been drained, leaving just under 200 euros. Only his retirement accounts, which required additional authentication to access, appeared untouched. With shaking hands, he tried to call the bank's emergency line, but the connection failed repeatedly, the vineyard's remote location providing only spotty service. He switched to his credit cards app and discovered all 3 of his cards had been maxed out with cash advances within the last 2 hours. The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't an impulsive abandonment. This was planned. The dinner, the Swiss job offer, the strategic separation from the group, all orchestrated to buy time while his accounts were drained. Dom pocketed his phone and walked to the parking lot, though he already knew what he would find. The rental car was gone. In its place was a piece of paper tucked under a decorative rock. Let's see how he gets back. Enjoy Romania, darling. Don't call us, we'll call you. Ugh. Dom stared at the note, Audrey's looping handwriting swimming before his eyes. The giggles of her friends, the knowing smirk on Preston's face. They'd planned this humiliation meticulously. He checked his pockets. His wallet was missing. He'd left it in the center console of the rental car while at the church, a careless habit Audrey had apparently anticipated. His phone had 18% battery remaining and no signal, and he was standing alone in the parking lot of a vineyard in rural Romania, with night falling and no transportation. The restaurant staff were locking up, giving him curious glances. Dom approached the manager, explained his situation as best he could through the language barrier, and managed to secure the name of a guest house in the nearest village, about 10 kilometers away. With no other options, Dom began walking along the darkened country road, the bottle of wine his only companion. As he walked, shock gave way to a cold, clear rage. With each step, the architect carefully dismantled his marriage in his mind, seeing the hidden structures beneath the surface for the first time. By the time he reached the village 3 hours later, feet blistered and shoulders aching, Dominic Valente had made a decision. He would survive this. He would rebuild. And then, with the same precision he brought to his architectural restorations, he would disassemble the lives of those who had betrayed him. Starting with Audrey. Chapter 3. Survival. The guest house was a modest building with geraniums and window boxes and a hand-painted sign. Inside, an elderly woman looked up from her knitting as Dom pushed open the door. It must have been a sight, disheveled, dusty from the road, clutching a half-empty wine bottle. English, he asked hopefully. The woman shook her head. Romana. Guten Deutsch. Dom's German was rudimentary, but better than nothing. Through broken phrases and gestures, he explained his situation: stranded, wallet stolen, needing a place to stay. The woman, who introduced herself as Ilinka, regarded him with suspicion until he offered his watch as collateral, a vintage Omega his grandfather had left him. Ilinka studied the timepiece, nodded once, and led him to a small but clean room under the eaves. She brought bread, cheese, and a bowl of soup, waving away his thanks with a grandmother's matter-of-factness about feeding a hungry stranger. Alone in the room, Dom tried his phone again. 1 bar of service, enough to send a text to Gabriella explaining his predicament before the battery died completely. He fell into an exhausted sleep, the events of the day churning through his dreams. Morning brought Ilinka with strong coffee and more bread. She pointed to his phone and then to an ancient charger by the bed, incompatible with his device, but the gesture touched him. American Embassy? He asked, miming a telephone. Ilinka nodded and led him downstairs to an old rotary phone in her kitchen. It took nearly an hour of being transferred between departments before Dom reached someone helpful at the embassy in Bucharest. The official was sympathetic but limited in what he could offer. Dom would need to make his way to Bucharest, over 200 kilometers away, to get emergency assistance and a temporary passport. Is there anyone who could wire you money for transportation? The official asked. Dom considered his options. His parents were deceased. His sister lived in Australia and was traveling in the outback, unreachable for weeks. Most of his friends were professional acquaintances, Unlikely to send money to a Romanian village with no questions asked. I'll figure something out, he told the official, arranging to call again the next day. After hanging up, Dom sat at Ilinka's kitchen table, the reality of his situation sinking in. Stranded in rural Romania. No ID, no money, no transportation, and a wife who had orchestrated it all, now presumably celebrating with her lover and friends. Ilinka watched him from the stove, where she was stirring a pot of something fragrant. Problem, she said in heavily accented English. It wasn't a question. Dom nodded. Big problem. She gestured for him to wait and disappeared into another room. She returned with a weathered man in his 60s, wearing work clothes and regarding Dom with careful scrutiny. My son Mihai, Ilinka said. English. Mihai pulled out a chair. My mother says you are in trouble. American? Yes, Dom confirmed, relief flooding him at finding someone he could properly communicate with. My wife and her friends left me here. Took my wallet, my rental car, emptied my bank accounts. Mihai's bushy eyebrows rose. Your wife did this? Why? Dom gave a bitter laugh. She's having an affair. This was their way of getting rid of me. Mihai translated for his mother, whose face darkened with disapproval. She launched into a torrent of Romanian, gesturing emphatically. My mother says your wife is not a good word to translate, Mihai said diplomatically. She wants to know what you will do. Get to Bucharest somehow. The American embassy can help once I'm there. Mihai nodded thoughtfully. I drive to Sighisoara tomorrow for supplies. I can take you there. From Sighisoara, there's train to Bucharest. I can't pay you, Dom admitted. Not until I get emergency funds from the embassy. Mihai waved this away. My mother likes you. She says you have honest eyes. He leaned forward. But in Bucharest, you will need money before embassy opens. You have skills? Can work. Dom thought for a moment. I'm an architect. I specialize in historical restoration. I speak some German, Italian, and French. Mihai's face brightened. Perfect. My cousin Nikolai owns restaurant in tourist area of Sighisoara. Many German tourists. He needs English and German speakers for busy season. He stood up. I call him now. You work 2 days, make enough for train ticket. Then Bucharest. It wasn't ideal, but it was a plan. Dom spent the rest of the day helping Ilinka in her garden. The physical labor a welcome distraction from the chaos of his life. By evening, Mihai had arranged everything with his cousin. The next morning, they set off for Sighisoara in Mihai's rattling old pickup truck. As they drove through the misty Romanian countryside, Mihai offered his perspective. In Romania, family is everything, he said, negotiating a sharp turn. What your wife did, this is unforgivable. In old times, such betrayal had serious consequences. Dom stared out the window. I'm not from old times. Mihai glanced at him. Perhaps not, but some traditional values are worth keeping. No? Loyalty, honor, justice. Justice. The word resonated with Dom. Not revenge. That was too emotional, too messy. Justice implied balance, restoration of what was right. The architect in him appreciated this concept. Sighisoara was a medieval citadel town. Its colorful buildings and cobblestone streets normally would have fascinated Dom. Instead, he focused on the immediate problem, earning enough for a train ticket to Bucharest. Nikolai's restaurant sat in the shadow of the famous clock tower. The cousin was a boisterous man who clapped Dom on the shoulder and immediately put him to work translating the menu into German and English, then serving as a waiter for the lunch rush. The work was exhausting but effective. Between the salary Nikolai paid him and the tips from appreciative German tourists, Dom had enough for his train ticket by the end of the second day. What's more, he'd made connections. Nikolai's son Adrian worked for a travel agency and helped Dom secure a temporary replacement for his driver's license using the digital copy Dom had fortunately stored in his email. Not fully legal, Adrian admitted, but good enough to get a hotel room until your embassy opens. The night before he was to leave for Bucharest, Dom sat with Mihai at a small table outside the restaurant. The older man had brought clothes for Dom, simple, sturdy items that would serve him better than his increasingly disheveled vacation attire. What will you do when you return to America? Mihai asked. Divorce, yes? Dom nodded. sipping the local plum brandy. Immediately. And then? Rebuild your life. Dom stared up at the stars. First justice, then rebuilding. Mihai studied him. This justice, it will not bring back what you lost. No, Dom agreed. But it will ensure they lose what they took from me. Mihai seemed to reach a decision. He pulled out a worn leather notebook and scribbled something. My nephew in Zurich, Radu Popescu. He works in banking. Tell him his Uncle Mihai sends you. He can help with financial matters. Discreetly, Dom took the information, understanding the implied offer. Thank you. For everything. One more thing, Mihai said, his expression serious. Whatever justice you seek, remember who you are. Revenge changes a man, not always for better. Dom nodded, though he had already begun to feel the transformation. The man who had entered Romania as Audrey's devoted husband was dying. Who would emerge from this crucible remained to be seen. The next morning, Dom boarded the train to Bucharest with his meager belongings, the notebook containing Radu's contact information and a determination that burned like cold fire. As the Romanian countryside flashed past, he began planning. Step 1. Secure emergency documents and funds. Step 2. Track Audrey and Preston's movements. Step 3. Reach Switzerland before they could clean out his retirement accounts. Step 4. Begin dismantling their lives with the same ruthless efficiency they had applied to his. By the time the train pulled into Bucharest's Gara de Nord station, Dom had shed the last vestiges of the man who had trusted his wife. In his place was someone harder, someone who understood that in this world, kindness was often repaid with betrayal, and only the ruthless survived. The American embassy in Bucharest proved more helpful than Dom had anticipated. His story of being abandoned by his wife, while embarrassing, was not unheard of. Within 2 days, he had a temporary passport, emergency credit card, and had filed police reports about the theft of his wallet and the unauthorized access to his accounts. During his meeting with the financial crimes officer, Dom learned something interesting. The largest withdrawals from his accounts had been made in Zurich, not Romania. Audrey and Preston were already in Switzerland, just as Flynn had suggested they would be. You should contact your banks in the U.S. immediately, the officer advised. Freeze any remaining accounts before they can be accessed. Dom did so, securing his retirement funds and the small emergency account he kept separate from his shared accounts with Audrey. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to get him to Switzerland. Before leaving Bucharest, Dom visited Gabriella's office at the restoration firm where they had collaborated. She was shocked by his appearance and even more stunned by his story. My God, Dom, this is criminal. Have you called Audrey's parents? They should know what she's done. Dom shook his head. Not yet. I need to handle this my own way first. He hesitated. Gabriella, I need a favor. If anyone asks about me, especially Audrey or a man named Preston Whitfield, tell them I went back to the States. Say I was devastated, falling apart. Gabriella frowned. What are you planning, Dom? Justice, he said simply. Will you help me? After a moment, she nodded. Of course. But promise me you won't do anything irreversible. Dom's smile didn't reach his eyes. The only irreversible thing was what they did to me. He stood to leave. Thank you, Gabriella, for everything. 3 days after being abandoned in rural Romania, Dom boarded a flight to Zurich with a temporary passport, a small amount of emergency funds, and the contact information from Mihai's nephew. As the plane lifted into the clouds, he felt a strange sense of peace. The old Dominic Valente, trusting, devoted, perhaps naive, had been left behind in Romania. The man flying to Switzerland carried newfound ruthlessness and a single-minded focus on justice. Audrey had created this new version of him. Soon, she would meet him and realize too late what she had done. Chapter 4. Reconstruction. Zurich gleamed under autumn sunshine, its pristine streets and elegant buildings a stark contrast to the rural, Romanian villages Dom had left behind. He had booked a modest room in a pension in the old town, using his emergency credit card. It would serve as his base of operations while he rebuilt his life and formulated his plan. His first stop was the local branch of his international bank, where he presented his temporary passport and explained his situation. The manager was appropriately sympathetic, though Dom detected a hint of judgment. Another tourist who had been careless with his belongings. Still, the emergency funds were processed, giving Dom enough to survive for a few weeks. After ensuring his remaining accounts were secure, Dom made his way to the address Mihai had given him. Radu Popescu's office was in a nondescript building near the financial district, with a small plaque simply reading Financial Consulting. The receptionist ushered Dom into a Spartan office where Radu, a trim man in his 40s with his uncle's shrewd eyes, greeted him in perfect English. Uncle Mihai explained your situation, Radu said, gesturing Dom to a seat. Quite unusual, even in my line of work. I appreciate you seeing me, Dom said. Your uncle suggested you might have expertise that could help me. Radu's smile was thin. My official expertise is in helping expatriates navigate Swiss banking regulations. My unofficial expertise is in tracing money when others would prefer it remains hidden. He leaned forward. Tell me what you need. Over the next hour, Dom laid out the financial aspects of his situation. The drained accounts, the timing of the withdrawals coinciding with his abandonment, and his suspicion that Audrey and Preston were using Switzerland as a base for whatever they had planned next. Radu listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When Dom finished, he tapped his pen thoughtfully against his notepad. Legally, this is complicated. Your wife had authorized access to most of these accounts, yes? The withdrawals, while morally reprehensible, may not technically be theft under the law. Understand, Dom said. I'm not necessarily looking for legal remedies. I want to know where they are, what they're planning, and how I can... He searched for the right word. Respond appropriately. Radu nodded slowly. I can help with the first two. The third is your business. He checked his watch. I need 48 hours to trace the movements of these funds. In the meantime, you should secure your situation here. Extend your hotel reservation, get proper clothes, and most importantly, establish a new banking presence that your wife cannot access. Dom left with instructions to return in 2 days and a list of recommended steps to stabilize his position. As he walked through Zurich's pristine streets, he felt a strange sense of empowerment. For the first time since being abandoned, he was taking concrete action rather than simply reacting to disaster. Following Radu's advice, Dom visited a recommended tailor for 2 basic business suits, found a longer-term apartment rental through an agency that accepted his temporary identification, and opened a new account at a different bank using his emergency documentation. His next step was to contact his firm in Boston. Using the apartment's secure internet connection, Dom arranged a video call with his partners, Martin Calloway and Diana Rivera. Dom, thank God, Diana exclaimed when his face appeared on screen. Audrey called the office 3 days ago, saying you'd had some kind of breakdown in Romania. She said you destroyed your phone during an argument and gone off-grid. We've been worried sick. Dom's expression hardened. That's not exactly what happened. He recounted the true events, watching their faces shift from concern to shock to anger. Jesus Christ, Martin muttered. Have you gone to the police? I filed reports in Romania and with the embassy, Dom confirmed. But there are complications. She had legal access to most of our accounts, and I'm still piecing together exactly what happened. What do you need from us? Diana asked practically. Time of discretion, Dom replied. I'm establishing myself in Switzerland for the foreseeable future. I can work remotely on the Boston Public Library restoration plans, and I need you to keep my location confidential if Audrey or anyone else inquires. Of course, Martin agreed. But Dom, eventually you'll need to return and deal with this legally. Divorce, criminal charges, whatever's appropriate. I will, Dom assured him. But first, I need to understand exactly what they're planning and why Switzerland was their destination. After the call ended, Dom sat back and considered his next steps. He needed more information about Preston Whitfield and the Swiss project Flynn had mentioned. Using his architectural credentials, he crafted careful emails to contacts in historical preservation circles in Switzerland, inquiring about major renovation projects in Interlaken. By evening, he had received several responses, including one that proved illuminating. The Hotel Belvedere project has been controversial among preservationists. The developer is using a Cyprus-based holding company, but rumor has it that American investors are behind it. Some of the proposed modifications would destroy significant historical elements. There's a public forum about it next week in Interlaken if you're interested. Dom added the forum to his calendar. It would be his first opportunity to potentially observe Preston in a professional setting, without being seen himself. The following day, Dom visited several real estate agencies, posing as a potential investor interested in historical properties. 2 conversations yielded additional information about Preston's Swiss operations, particularly his pattern of purchasing historically significant properties, renovating them with minimal regard for preservation standards, and flipping them to wealthy international buyers. When Dom returned to Radu's office as scheduled, the financial consultant had assembled a detailed report. "Your wife and her companions arrived in Zurich 4 days ago," Radu began, spreading documents on his desk. "They stayed 1 night at the Bauer au Lac, one of our most expensive hotels, before moving on to Interlaken. The funds withdrawn from your accounts were initially deposited in a temporary account here, then transferred to an investment vehicle associated with this property development." He slid across a prospectus for the Hotel Belvedere renovation. "This is the same project I've been hearing about," Dom said, examining the document. "Preston Whitfield's Cypress Company is the developer?" Rado nodded. "Whitfield Preservation Partners. A misleading name, given their reputation among actual preservationists. The interesting part is this." He pointed to a document showing fund allocations. "Your money, approximately 200,000 euros, has been designated as an architectural consultation fee, ostensibly for your services on the project." Dom stared at the document, the audacity of the scheme becoming clear. "They're using my money to pay for work they expect me to do?" "It appears so," Radu confirmed. "I believe the plan was to bring you into the project legitimately, have you do the preservation work to satisfy local regulations, then gradually transition you out while keeping most of the fee. Your wife would claim her portion in the divorce as joint assets invested during the marriage. And now that I'm not cooperating with their plan?" Radu shrugged. "They'll need to find another preservation architect quickly. The permits require an expert with your credentials to sign off on the plans." Dom considered this information, architectural possibilities forming in his mind. "Can you give me the actual plans for the renovation? Not just this prospectus, but the technical specifications they've filed with the local authorities?" "Possible, yes. Expensive, also yes." Radu named a figure that made Dom wince, but he nodded agreement. "One more thing," Radu added. "I located your wife and Mr. Whitfield. They're staying at the Victoria Jungfrau Grand Hotel in Interlaken. Mr. Whitfield has booked the Imperial Suite for 3 weeks. Your wife has been using the spa facilities extensively, paid for with a new credit card issued in her name, but linked to an account funded by your money." Dom absorbed this, his anger crystallizing into resolve. "How soon can you get those plans?" 3 days. Maybe 2 if I expedite." "Do it," Dom said. "And I'll need a good camera with a telephoto lens." Radu raised an eyebrow. "Surveillance. Research," Dom corrected. "And while you're at it, could you find out if any positions are available at architectural firms in Interlaken? I'm going to need legitimate reasons to be there." As Dom left Radu's office, his phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Dominic Valente." "Dom? Oh my God, you're alive." Audrey's voice, dripping with fake concern. "Everyone's been so worried. Where are you?" Dom stepped into a quiet alcove, his heart hammering despite his outward calm. "Hello, Audrey. Surprised to hear from me?" "Baby, I've been frantic." Her voice quavered with practiced emotion. "When you disappeared from the vineyard, we searched everywhere. The police said your wallet was found in Bucharest. We thought you'd been kidnapped or worse." The performance was remarkable. If he hadn't experienced her betrayal firsthand, he might almost have believed her. "How inconsiderate of me," he said coolly, "to disappear while you were searching the spas of the Victoria Jungfrau with Preston." A beat of silence. "What?" "I don't." "Save it, Audrey. I know everything. The affair, the drained accounts, the plan to use me for the Belvedere project before discarding me." Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its panicked edge. "You weren't supposed to find out like this." "How was I supposed to find out? After you'd taken everything?" "It's not what you think," she began, but Dom cut her off. I think it's exactly what I think. Tell Preston his Swiss project has a problem. A preservation architect problem. Dom, wait. Oh, and Audrey? I'd start practicing your concerned widow voice. You're going to need it. He ended the call before she could respond. It was a theatrical threat. Dom had no intention of physical violence, but the desired effect would be achieved. Let them wonder what he knew, what he planned. Let them waste resources looking over their shoulders while he constructed his response. Over the next week, Dom established himself in Interlaken, securing a small apartment and a consulting position with a local architectural firm specializing in historical properties. His new colleagues were delighted to have an American preservation expert join them, particularly one with knowledge of the controversial Belvedere project. From his new vantage point, Dom could observe Preston's operation without revealing his presence. He attended the public forum on the Belvedere renovation, sitting in the back while Preston presented glossy renderings that obscured the true extent of the historical compromises being made. Dom noted the municipal officials who seemed particularly supportive of the project, filing away their names for future reference. Through his firm, Dom gained access to building records for Preston's previous Swiss projects, discovering a pattern of code violations, historical compromises, and inspectors who mysteriously found no issues with the work. It was a sophisticated operation that balanced on the edge of legality, profitable precisely because it cut corners others wouldn't dare to cut. When Radu delivered the Belvedere plans, Dom spent 3 days analyzing them in minute detail. What he found confirmed his suspicions. The renovation would irreparably damage key historical elements while appearing to preserve them, creating a Potemkin facade of historical integrity while maximizing profitable interior space. More importantly, he identified critical vulnerabilities in the design, areas where small changes to the plans could create major problems during construction, the kind that wouldn't be discovered until significant money had been invested. Dominic Valente, preservation architect, would never sabotage a historical building. But the man who had walked out of Romania, the man Audrey and Preston had created, wasn't bound by those same professional ethics. Not when justice was at stake. As October turned to November, Dom received a text from Radu. They're looking for you. Hired private investigator. Be careful. That evening, Dom stood at his apartment window, watching snow begin to fall on the distant peaks surrounding Interlaken. His plan was taking shape, each element fitting together. Preston's project, Audrey's new life, the network of facilitators and enablers who had helped them, all would be dismantled piece by piece. In Romania, Dom had been abandoned, stripped of everything. In Switzerland, he would be the architect of their downfall. And when Audrey eventually came begging, as he knew she would, it would already be too late. Chapter 5. Infiltration. The Victoria Jungfrau Grand Hotel embodied Belle Epoque luxury. Its elegant facade overlooking Interlaken's Hohweg Promenade with the Jungfrau Mountain providing a dramatic backdrop. From his vantage point in a cafe across the street, Dom observed the hotel's main entrance through the viewfinder of his camera. Over the past week, he had established a pattern. The same table, a laptop open to architectural plans, a perfect cover for his surveillance. The staff now greeted him by name, assuming he was working on one of the many luxury renovation projects in the area. At precisely 9:15 a.m., Preston emerged through the hotel's revolving door, immaculate in a tailored overcoat. As had become his routine, he headed toward his temporary office in a converted villa 2 blocks away. Based on Dom's observations, Preston would remain there until lunch, when Audrey would typically join him. Dom captured several photos, then packed his equipment. It was time for the next phase. The offices of Berger and Schmidt Architecture were housed in a renovated 19th century building near Interlaken's West Railway Station. Dom had been working there for 3 weeks now, establishing himself as a diligent and knowledgeable preservation consultant. His colleagues appreciated his expertise, and his employer, Heinrich Berger, had already offered to extend his contract. Dominic, perfect timing, Heinrich called as Dom entered. The Municipal Building Authority has requested additional consultations on the Belvedere project. Since you've worked on similar renovations in America, I'd like you to represent us. Dom maintained a neutral expression, though his pulse quickened. The Whitfield project? I thought Weber and Partners had the preservation contract. Heinrich's expression soured. They did, but there have been concerns about their assessment. The Historical Preservation Council has demanded a secondary review. This was better than Dom could have hoped for, legitimate access to Preston's project without revealing his connection. When is the meeting? Dom asked, already calculating how to use this opportunity. Tomorrow morning. The developers will be there, along with representatives from the council. It could be contentious, Heinrich warned. The American developer is, how do you say, pushy? Dom smiled thinly. I've dealt with pushy developers before. I'll review the files tonight. That evening, Dom prepared meticulously, studying the Belvedere plans and identifying critical areas where the historical integrity was most compromised. He drafted alternative approaches that would appear reasonable while requiring significant, expensive changes to Preston's plans. The next morning, Dom dressed in his most professional attire and arrived early at the municipal building. He took a seat at the far end of the conference room, arranging his materials while watching the other attendees arrive. The Historical Preservation Council members entered first, three serious-looking Swiss academics who nodded politely to Dom. The Weber and Partners representatives followed, looking nervous. Finally, the door opened to admit Preston, flanked by Flynn Cooper and another man Dom didn't recognize. Dom kept his head down, ostensibly reviewing documents as Preston took his seat at the opposite end of the table. The meeting began with introductions around the table. When Dom's turn came, he spoke clearly but didn't make direct eye contact with Preston. Dominic Kane, preservation consultant with Berger and Schmidt. I specialize in adaptive reuse of Belle Epoque structures. He had been using his mother's maiden name professionally in Switzerland, a small precaution that had now paid significant dividends. Preston showed no recognition, merely nodding impatiently as the introductions continued. The meeting proceeded with a presentation of the Belvedere plans by Weber and Partners, followed by the Preservation Council's concerns. When Dom was invited to offer his assessment, he spoke with measured authority, highlighting specific issues that would resonate with the council members. The proposed modifications to the east wing would irreversibly damage the original Berkey ironwork, he noted, displaying a detail from the plans. Additionally, the basement excavation comes dangerously close to the original foundation stones, which have historical significance dating to 1872. Preston leaned forward, irritation evident. Mr. Kane, is it? The structural engineers have assured us these modifications are necessary for modern safety standards. Dom met his gaze for the first time, a frisson of satisfaction running through him as he recognized no awareness in Preston's eyes. Safety is paramount, Mr. Whitfield, but there are alternatives that preserve historical elements while meeting code requirements. For instance, he proceeded to outline approaches that would address the council's concerns while significantly complicating the construction process and increasing costs. Each suggestion was technically sound, but would require substantial revisions to Preston's plans. As the meeting progressed, Dom observed Preston's growing frustration. By the time they adjourned for lunch, the council members were nodding in agreement with Dom's recommendations, while Preston and Flynn huddled in urgent conversation. Dom gathered his materials, preparing to leave, when Preston approached him. Mr. Kane, a word? Dom turned, face professionally neutral. Of course. Your suggestions, while interesting, would add months to our timeline and millions to our budget, Preston said, his charm strained. Perhaps we could discuss some more practical alternatives over lunch. My treat. Dom pretended to check his watch. I'm afraid I have another appointment. However, I'd be happy to prepare a detailed report addressing your concerns. Flynn joined them, eyeing Dom with suspicion. Have we met before? You look familiar. Dom smiled blandly. I don't believe so. I've only been in Switzerland for a month. Before that, I was working in Boston. Must be mistaken, Flynn muttered, though his expression remained dubious. I'll have that report to you by Thursday, Dom said to Preston, extending his hand. I believe we can find solutions that satisfy all parties. Preston's handshake was firm, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I look forward to it, Mr. Kane." As Dom left the building, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Phase 1 had been successfully executed. He had positioned himself within Preston's project, created legitimate obstacles, and done so without revealing his identity. That afternoon, Dom visited Radu with a new request: background information on every official involved with the Belvedere project approvals. If Preston had been circumventing regulations on previous projects, he'd need allies within the municipal government. Identifying those connections would be crucial to Dom's plan. 3 days later, Radu delivered a comprehensive dossier. 2 building inspectors and 1 municipal councilor showed suspicious financial activities coinciding with Preston's previous Swiss projects. Most interesting was Edouard Meyer, the chief building inspector, who had recently purchased a vacation property in southern Spain that seemed beyond his official salary. Dom's next move was to cultivate a relationship with Klaus Weber, the principal of Weber & Partners, whose firm held the primary preservation contract for the Belvedere. Over coffee at a discreet cafe, Dom carefully probed the stressed architect. "The council seems unusually focused on this project," Dom observed. "Have they been this demanding on your other renovations?" Weber glanced around before responding quietly. "Never. My firm has handled dozens of historical renovations. Suddenly, with Belvedere, every detail is scrutinized. I believe," he hesitated, "I believe I am being set up to take blame if anything goes wrong." "By Whitfield." Weber nodded miserably. "The original plans I submitted were appropriate. Then came suggestions for modifications, ways to maximize space, reduce costs. When I objected on preservation grounds, I was reminded how easily my firm could be replaced." "Do you still have your original plans?" Dom asked casually. Weber's eyes widened. "Yes, but what good would that do now?" "Documentation," Dom suggested. "Insurance, in case accusations fly later." 2 days later, a manila envelope arrived at Dom's apartment containing Weber's original preservation plans. Plans that would prove Preston had pressured the architect to compromise historical standards. Meanwhile, Dom's report to Preston was a masterpiece of technical obfuscation, appearing collaborative while inserting requirements that would significantly impact the project's profitability. When Preston requested a meeting to clarify certain points, Dom made sure it was scheduled at Berger and Schmidt's office with Heinrich present. The meeting was tense, with Preston barely containing his frustration as Dom defended each recommendation with reference to Swiss preservation standards. When Preston suggested more flexible interpretations might be possible, Dom expressed concern that such approaches might not satisfy the council's heightened scrutiny. "This project seems to have attracted unusual attention," Dom observed innocently. "Is there a particular reason for that?" Preston's jaw tightened momentarily before he recovered his smooth demeanor. "Perhaps our American approach has ruffled some feathers. Europeans can be traditional." "Perhaps," Dom agreed mildly. "Or perhaps there are concerns about the pattern established by your previous renovations." Preston's eyes narrowed slightly. "You've researched my work?" "Of course. Due diligence." Dom smiled professionally. The Lauterbrunnen project, for instance, had several post-completion issues with historical elements, and the Grindelwald chalets exhibited structural problems that weren't identified during inspection. Flynn, who had been quiet until now, leaned forward. "You seem remarkably well-informed about our projects, Mr. Kane." Dom met his gaze steadily. "It's my job to be informed, Mr. Cooper. Historical preservation is a small community, even internationally." After Preston and Flynn departed, Heinrich clapped Dom on the shoulder. "I've never seen anyone stand their ground so effectively against Whitfield. Most people fold under his pressure or succumb to his charm." "I'm immune to both," Dom said with a thin smile. That evening, as snow fell heavily outside his apartment windows, Dom reviewed his progress. He had successfully infiltrated Preston's operation, created legitimate obstacles to the Belvedere project, and gathered evidence of questionable practices. But he had yet to make a move that would directly impact Audrey. The opportunity came unexpectedly the following day, when Dom overheard two colleagues discussing a charity gala at the Victoria Jungfrau that weekend, a fundraiser for alpine cultural preservation that would attract Interlaken's elite, including Preston and his glamorous American companion. Dom secured an invitation through Heinrich, who was pleased to have his firm represented at such a prestigious event. The evening of the gala, Dom dressed in his best suit and arrived fashionably late, positioning himself at the bar with a clear view of the entrance. When Audrey appeared on Preston's arm, Dom felt a curious detachment. She was stunning in a burgundy gown, her hair elegantly styled, laughing at something Preston whispered in her ear. To anyone watching, they appeared to be the perfect power couple, wealthy, attractive, at ease in luxury surroundings. Only Dom knew the foundation their display was built upon: his stolen money, his derailed career, his abandoned body on a dark Romanian road. The cold rage that had sustained him sharpened to a fine point as he watched them work the room, Audrey charming the Swiss elite while Preston networked. Dom circulated carefully, avoiding their immediate vicinity while positioning himself to overhear conversations. By midnight, he had gathered useful intelligence. Preston was hosting a site visit at the Belvedere for potential investors the following week. Audrey was cultivating relationships with the wives of key municipal officials. And most importantly, they were planning to proceed with construction despite the Preservation Council's concerns. As the evening wound down, Dom positioned himself near the coat check, timing his departure to coincide with a moment when Audrey stepped away from Preston to visit the ladies' room. When she emerged, Dom deliberately stepped in her path. The recognition in her eyes was immediate and absolute. She froze, color draining from her face. "Lovely event, isn't it?" Dom said conversationally, as though addressing a stranger. The Swiss certainly know how to preserve their cultural heritage. Audrey glanced frantically around, confirming Preston was out of earshot. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. "I live here now," Dom replied calmly. "Beautiful country, excellent banking system, fascinating architectural preservation challenges." Her eyes narrowed. "If you think you can ruin this for me." "Ruin what exactly? Your relationship with Preston? Your access to my money? Your carefully constructed narrative about your unstable ex-husband?" Something flickered in her expression. Calculation, perhaps, or the beginning of fear. "What do you want, Dom?" He smiled, cold and precise. "Justice. Nothing more, nothing less." "Dom, listen." She lowered her voice, leaning closer. "Things got out of hand in Romania. It wasn't supposed to go that far. If you'll just be reasonable." Reasonable. The word hung between them, razor sharp. Like abandoning someone in a foreign country without money or identification was reasonable. Like draining shared accounts was reasonable. "I can explain everything," she began, but Dom cut her off with a quiet laugh. "Too late for explanations, Audrey. Much too late." He glanced past her. "Your boyfriend is looking for you. Better hurry. He seems impatient." Audrey turned to see Preston scanning the crowd, his expression darkening when he spotted her engaged in intense conversation with a stranger. "This isn't over," she whispered urgently, turning to leave. "On that, we agree completely," Dom replied, watching her hurry back to Preston's side. He observed their interaction from a distance, her plastered-on smile, the whispered exchange, Preston's suspicious glance in his direction. Dom raised his glass in a mocking toast before slipping out into the snowy night. The encounter had served its purpose. Audrey now knew he was in Switzerland, that he was aware of their plans, and most importantly, that he was not the broken man they had expected him to be. Uncertainty would begin to erode their confidence, and uncertainty was a foundation that could not support their ambitions. Back in his apartment, Dom updated his whiteboard where he tracked the elements of his plan. The Belvedere project was now facing preservation obstacles. Preston's corrupt connections had been identified. Audrey's peace of mind had been shattered. But the true dismantling had not yet begun. Opening his laptop, Dom composed an anonymous email to the Swiss Financial Regulatory Authority, attaching documentation of suspicious transactions associated with the Belvedere project approval process. He included enough detail to trigger an investigation, but withheld key information that would become his leverage in the coming weeks. Next, he drafted a series of detailed preservation concerns to be submitted to the Historical Council under Berger and Schmidt's letterhead, each designed to create delays and increase costs for Preston's project. Heinrich would approve them, given the growing prestige his firm was garnering from challenging the American developer. Finally, Dom texted Radu, "Time for Phase 2. Prepare the documentation we discussed." Phase 2 would target Preston's investors, undermining their confidence by revealing the true state of the Belvedere project and the regulatory challenges ahead. Without investor support, Preston's carefully constructed financial house of cards would begin to wobble. As for Audrey, her reckoning would come last, when she had witnessed Preston's downfall and recognized her own vulnerability. Dom wanted her to experience the same gradual, dawning horror he had felt on that dark Romanian road. The realization that everything she had built her future upon was disintegrating beneath her feet. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Interlaken in pristine white. Dom stood at his window, watching the flakes swirl in the streetlights. There was a certain beauty in it, destruction and renewal, proceeding with natural inevitability. Just like his plan. Chapter 6. Escalation. The offices of the Swiss Financial Markets Supervisory Authority, FINMA, in Bern projected the serious efficiency one would expect from the nation's financial regulator. Dom sat in a minimalist reception area, waiting for his appointment with senior investigator Adrian Keller. The dossier on his lap contained carefully selected documents, enough to pique official interest without revealing his personal connection to the case. "Herr Kane? Investigator Keller will see you now," the receptionist announced. Dom was shown into a spare office where Keller, a precise man in his 50s with steel-rimmed glasses, gestured him to a seat. "You indicated you have information regarding potential financial irregularities connected to the Hotel Belvedere renovation in Interlaken," Keller began, his English crisp and formal. "Yes," Dom confirmed, opening his folder. "In my capacity as a preservation consultant with Berger and Schmidt, I've encountered suspicious patterns surrounding the project's approval process." Over the next hour, Dom presented evidence suggesting corrupt relationships between Preston's development company and key municipal officials. He highlighted unusual cash flows, questionable property purchases by Inspector Edouard Meyer, and inconsistencies in the approval documentation. "Why bring this to FINMA rather than the local police?" Keller asked, studying Dom carefully. "The financial aspects cross cantonal and international boundaries," Dom explained. "And frankly, I'm concerned about local influence. The developer has cultivated strong relationships with municipal authorities. I notice you have not included all the supporting documentation referenced in your notes," Keller observed. Dom nodded. "Security concerns. I have the complete files secured elsewhere, available when needed for official proceedings." It was a calculated withholding, ensuring his continued relevance to any investigation while maintaining control over the narrative. Keller closed his notebook. "We will look into these matters discreetly for now. If your allegations prove substantive, there may be both regulatory and criminal implications. Understand. Discretion is appreciated given my professional position." As Dom left FINMA's offices, he checked his watch. Perfect timing for his next appointment. A chance encounter with one of Preston's primary investors. The Bellevue Palace Hotel's lobby bar offered the ideal setting, refined, discreet, and frequented by Bern's financial elite. Dom ordered a mineral water and positioned himself at a table with visibility of the entrance. At precisely 2:15 p.m., Otto Reinhardt entered, exactly as Radu's intelligence had predicted. Reinhardt, a senior partner at Zurich Capital Partners, was the lead investor in Preston's Belvedere project. According to Radu's research, he was also increasingly concerned about delays and rising costs. Dom waited until Reinhardt had ordered a coffee, then approached his table. "Herr Reinhardt, Dominic Kane, Berger, and Schmidt Architecture. I hope I'm not interrupting." Reinhardt looked up, momentarily surprised. "Not at all. Berger and Schmidt. You're consulting on the Belvedere, yes?" "That's right. I won't take much of your time, but since I recognized you, I wanted to introduce myself. Your investment in preserving Swiss architectural heritage is admirable. The flattery worked. Reinhardt gestured for Dom to join him. Heritage is important, yes, but so is pragmatic development. The Belvedere project seems to be encountering an unusual number of obstacles. Dom nodded sympathetically. Historical renovations are always complex. Though in my experience, the current difficulties are somewhat unusual. How so? Reinhardt leaned forward slightly. Typically, preservation concerns are identified early and addressed in the initial planning. The Belvedere issues emerged suspiciously late. Dom paused, letting the implication hang. One might wonder why the preliminary approvals progressed so smoothly, only for substantial problems to arise after significant investment had been committed. Reinhardt's expression darkened. Are you suggesting impropriety in the approval process? Dom maintained a professional demeanor. I'm simply noting the pattern is atypical, especially considering similar patterns in Mr. Whitfield's previous Swiss projects. Previous projects? Reinhardt's coffee sat forgotten. The Lauterbrunnen renovation, the Grindelwald chalets, both encountered post-approval complications requiring substantial additional investment. Both ultimately sold for less than projected returns. Reinhardt studied Dom with new intensity. Mr. Kane, why are you sharing these observations with me? Dom smiled slightly. Professional integrity. The preservation community values transparency, and investors should have complete information when making decisions. He stood, placing a business card beside Reinhardt's coffee. If you have any questions about the technical aspects of the preservation requirements, my door is always open. As Dom departed, he glanced back to see Reinhardt already on his phone, his expression grim. The seed had been planted. Over the next 2 weeks, Dom executed a series of precisely calibrated moves. Through Heinrich, he submitted additional preservation concerns to the Historical Council, each legitimate but maximally inconvenient for Preston's timeline. At Berger and Schmidt, he drafted alternative approaches that would address these concerns, approaches that were technically sound but would significantly increase costs. Meanwhile, Radu reported that Reinhardt had begun quietly investigating Preston's previous projects and had scheduled meetings with other Belvedere investors. The Swiss Financial Authority had opened a preliminary inquiry into Eduard Meyer's finances. And most satisfyingly, Preston had been observed in heated arguments with his project managers at the Belvedere site. Dom's encounter with Audrey at the gala had produced the desired effect as well. Through the interlocking grapevine, he learned she had become increasingly anxious, checking over her shoulder in public, asking questions about an American architect named Kane. The pressure was building, but Dom knew better than to underestimate either Preston or Audrey. They had proven their capacity for ruthlessness in Romania. He needed to be prepared for their counterattack. It came sooner than expected. Returning to his apartment one evening, Dom found the door slightly ajar. Inside, everything appeared untouched, but his instincts screamed danger. A thorough check revealed sophisticated listening devices planted in the living room and bedroom. His laptop had been accessed. Not obviously, but the security program he'd installed recorded an intrusion attempt. Rather than removing the bugs, Dom left them in place. From now on, his apartment would feed them carefully crafted misinformation while his actual planning moved to a secure location Radu had arranged. The next day, Dom received a call from Heinrich, his voice uncharacteristically concerned. Dominic, there's a situation. A man visited the office claiming to be from the American Architectural Association, asking unusual questions about your background and credentials. What kind of questions? Dom asked, though he could guess. Whether we'd verified your experience, checked references for Boston. He implied there might be irregularities. Heinrich paused. Dominic, is there something I should know? It's a professional dispute from my previous work, Dom said smoothly. A developer whose project I deemed non-compliant with preservation standards. He's been attempting to discredit me since then. Heinrich seemed relieved. That makes sense. I told him your work with us has been exemplary and suggested he take any concerns through official channels. Thank you, Heinrich. I appreciate your support. After ending the call, Dom texted Radu. Whitfield investigating Kane identity. Accelerate timeline. The response came within minutes. Financial authority moving faster than expected. Meyer being questioned today. Reinhardt meeting other investors tomorrow. Perfect. It was time to force Preston's hand. The next morning, Dom presented Heinrich with a comprehensive analysis of the Belvedere project, highlighting critical structural issues that had been overlooked in the initial plans. These aren't merely cosmetic preservation concerns, Dom explained. The proposed basement expansion could compromise the original foundation, potentially leading to catastrophic failure if not addressed. Heinrich reviewed the findings with growing alarm. This must be reported immediately to the developers and the building authority. Of course, Dom agreed. Safety must come first. I prepared detailed recommendations for corrective measures. The measures, while necessary, would require extensive redesign and significantly increase costs, potentially enough to sink the project's already strained financial model. Heinrich called an emergency meeting with Preston's team for that afternoon. Dom arrived early, setting up his presentation materials. When Preston entered, flanked by Flynn and two project engineers, his face was a mask of barely contained fury. "Mr. Kane," he said coldly, "I understand you've discovered yet another problem with our project." "Not discovered," Dom corrected. "Identified through standard structural analysis. Analysis that should have been conducted before approvals were sought." He proceeded to present his findings, using the technical language of his profession to outline potential disaster scenarios if the issues weren't addressed. The engineers grew increasingly uncomfortable as the presentation continued, eventually acknowledging the validity of Dom's concerns. Preston, watching his project disintegrate before his eyes, finally erupted. "This is absurd. These issues weren't raised by Weber and Partners or the initial building inspection. Now suddenly they're critical safety concerns. Perhaps you should ask Inspector Meyer why these weren't identified earlier," Dom suggested mildly, though he may be preoccupied with his discussions at the financial authority today. Preston froze, his expression shifting from anger to calculation. "What did you say?" "I believe Inspector Meyer is meeting with FINMA investigators today," Dom repeated. "Something about unexplained assets. Public servants' finances can be such complicated things." The implication hung in the air. Flynn whispered urgently to Preston, who stared at Dom with new understanding dawning in his eyes. "Gentlemen," Heinrich intervened, oblivious to the subtext, "the structural issues must be addressed regardless of other considerations. Safety and preservation standards are non-negotiable." Of course, Preston agreed, his charm resurfacing though his eyes remained cold. "Mr. Kane has been thorough. Perhaps he and I could discuss his recommendations privately to expedite solutions." "I'd be happy to meet," Dom said. "Tomorrow morning at your office?" "Perfect." Preston's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just the two of us." After the meeting adjourned, Heinrich congratulated Dom on his professionalism. The Whitfield Group clearly underestimated the complexity of working with historical structures. "Your expertise has been invaluable." "Just doing my job," Dom replied, though he knew the next day's meeting would have nothing to do with architecture. That evening, Dom prepared carefully for his confrontation with Preston. He selected his attire, not his usual professional suit, but clothing that would suggest his true identity to Preston's more careful examination. He also ensured that his temporary phone contained nothing incriminating, as it would likely be confiscated. Most importantly, he met with Radu to finalize the contingency plans they had established. If Dom didn't check in by noon, Radu would release the complete dossier on Preston's activities to the authorities and key investors. "Are you certain this confrontation is necessary?" Radu asked. "We could simply proceed with the financial and regulatory pressure." Dom shook his head. "Preston needs to know who he's fighting. It will destabilize him, force him to make mistakes. And if he becomes violent, that would be a mistake too," Dom said quietly. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Dom walked to Preston's temporary office, alert for surveillance or potential ambush. The converted villa appeared quiet, with only Preston's Audi parked outside. The receptionist, a young Swiss woman who seemed uncomfortable with her employer's intensifying stress, directed Dom to Preston's private office on the second floor. As Dom climbed the stairs, he noted the building's layout, identifying potential exits. Preston stood as Dom entered, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. Mr. Kane, or should I say Mr. Valente? Dom smiled slightly, taking the offered seat. So you finally put it together? I was beginning to think you'd never recognize your own handiwork. Preston studied him with cold calculation. Quite the resurrection. From abandoned in Romania to architecting my professional demise in Switzerland. I confess, I'm almost impressed. Almost. Dom raised an eyebrow. Impressed would imply surprise. But you see, Dominic, your fundamental nature was always your weakness. Methodical, precise, predictable. Preston leaned forward. Even your revenge follows architectural principles. Careful planning, structural integrity, attention to detail. You seem remarkably calm for someone whose project is collapsing, whose corrupt inspector is being investigated, and whose investors are losing confidence. Preston laughed softly. Setbacks happen in my business. The Belvedere is just one project. I have others in development across Europe. Dom corrected. Past tense. Something flickered in Preston's eyes. Meaning the Swiss financial authorities aren't just investigating Eduard Meyer. They're examining all of your Swiss projects, your Cyprus holding company, and your capital flows between jurisdictions. Preston's composure slipped momentarily. Bullshit. They couldn't possibly have the documentation they need. Dom finished. They do. Not all of it, not yet, but enough to freeze operations while they investigate. You've overplayed your hand. Preston recovered quickly. Even if they investigate, they won't find anything definitively illegal. Aggressive business practices aren't crimes. True, Dom acknowledged. But the investigation itself will be enough. Your investors will withdraw. Your municipal allies will distance themselves. Your project will stall. And your reputation, the only real currency you have, will be compromised. Preston stood, pacing to the window. What do you want, Dominic? Money? Your wife back? Tell me the price to end this vendetta. This isn't a negotiation, Dom said calmly. It's a dismantling. Just like you and Audrey dismantled my life in Romania. Preston turned, his mask of civility slipping further. That was Audrey's idea, you know, leaving you stranded. I merely suggested separating you from your assets. How gentlemanly of you, Dom said dryly. Throwing your accomplice under the bus at the first sign of trouble. Accomplice. Preston scoffed. She was the architect of your destruction, not me. She's been planning her exit strategy since London. I simply provided the opportunity. Dom absorbed this, unsurprised but still feeling the sting of confirmation. And now I'm providing you with an opportunity. A chance to experience what I did. Is that your plan? Leave me stranded in Romania? Preston's tone was mocking. Nothing so crude, Dom replied. You'll remain exactly where you are, watching everything you've built collapse around you. Your projects, your reputation, your freedom. Preston's expression hardened. You think you can threaten me? Do you know what happens to people who interfere with my business? Dom stood, matching Preston's stance. Are you referring to what happened to Martin Schaefer when he refused to falsify inspection reports on the Lauterbrunnen project? Or to Christine Vogel when she questioned financial discrepancies at your Zurich office? Preston went very still. You're playing with fire, Dominic. No, Dom corrected. I'm playing with leverage. Every threat you make, every action you take against me, simply activates another level of disclosure I've arranged. Harm me, and everything goes public, not just to the authorities, but to your investors, your banking partners, your future clients. He moved toward the door. You have until the end of the week to withdraw from the Belvedere project and begin liquidating your Swiss holdings. After that, the complete dossier goes to FINMA, Interpol, and the American SEC. And Audrey? Preston asked, his voice deceptively casual. What's your plan for her? Dom paused, hand on the doorknob. Audrey made her choice in Romania. Now she'll live with the consequences of that choice. As Dom left the building, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Tonight. Victoria Jungfrau Bar. 9 p.m. Ugh. He smiled slightly. Right on schedule. Audrey, sensing Preston's vulnerability, was making her move. The pieces were falling into place. Preston was now aware of his adversary and the threat posed. The authorities were closing in on his corrupt practices. Investors were losing confidence. And Audrey, the final piece in this puzzle, was beginning to calculate her own survival strategy. Dom texted Radu, meeting complete, proceeding as planned. Then he headed to Berger and Schmidt to maintain his professional facade while awaiting the evening's confrontation with his wife. The Victoria Jungfrau's elegant bar offered the perfect setting for their reunion. Public enough to prevent overt hostility, private enough for honest conversation. Dom arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a corner table with a clear view of the entrance and exit. When Audrey appeared, she looked nothing like the confident socialite at the gala. Her face was drawn, her movements tense as she scanned the bar. When she spotted him, something like resignation settled over her features. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Curiosity," Dom replied. "I wanted to see what desperation looks like on you." She flinched slightly, then ordered a martini from the passing waiter. "Preston knows who you are." "Yes, we had a productive chat this morning." "He's dangerous, Dom. More than you realize." Dom studied her, noting the genuine fear beneath her practiced poise. "Concern for my safety, Audrey? That's touching, considering the last time we were together. You left me stranded without money or identification in rural Romania." She had the grace to look away. "That wasn't the plan. Not originally. Do enlighten me. What was the original plan?" Audrey twisted her cocktail napkin. "A clean break. The Switzerland project was real. Preston needed a preservation architect with your credentials. You'd work on the Belvedere. We'd separate amicably, divide assets. And then Preston found out about us in London. He became possessive, controlling. Said if I wanted a future with him, I needed to cut all ties with you. Completely." Dom laughed softly. "And naturally, that meant theft and abandonment." Her martini arrived, and she took a large sip. "Preston convinced me you'd fight the divorce. Try to keep me tied to you. He said a clean break was the only way. You'd be angry at first, but eventually move on." How considerate of him. Audrey leaned forward. "I know you don't believe me, but I never intended for you to be hurt. Stranded, yes. Inconvenienced, yes. But not in actual danger. Your notes suggested otherwise," Dom reminded her. "Let's see how he gets back. Not exactly concerned for my welfare." She had the decency to flush. Naomi wrote that. She and the others, they turned it into a game. By then, I was in too deep to object. Poor Audrey. Dom's voice was ice. Coerced into betraying her husband by peer pressure. "How old are we, 16? I'm not asking for forgiveness," she snapped, then visibly composed herself. "I'm trying to warn you. Preston is unraveling. Whatever you've done to his projects, his finances, he's not taking it well. He has connections, Dom, dangerous ones. Yet here you are, meeting his enemy. Interesting loyalty." Audrey's eyes darted around the bar. "Preston doesn't know I'm here. He thinks I'm at the spa." "Ah," Dom nodded, understanding dawning. The rats began abandoning the sinking ship. "It's not like that," she protested, but her expression betrayed her. "It's exactly like that," Dom countered. "You've calculated your odds with Preston are diminishing, so you're hedging your bets. Approaching me for, what exactly? Protection? A share of whatever you imagine I've taken from him." "Information," she said quietly. "I have access to things you don't. Preston's private files, offshore accounts, the names of people who've helped him bury problems in the past." Dom sat back, studying his wife with new eyes. She had always been adaptable, pragmatic. Now she was offering to betray Preston as readily as she had betrayed him. And in exchange for this information? "Immunity," she said simply. "When this all comes crashing down, and we both know it will, I want to walk away clean. No criminal charges, no financial penalties." "That's not entirely within my power," Dom noted. "But your influence with the authorities is growing," she countered. "They trust your information. If you told them I was a cooperative witness rather than an accomplice." Dom considered her offer. The information she could provide would certainly accelerate Preston's downfall. But trusting Audrey was a fool's game. He knew that better than anyone. "I'll consider it," he said finally. "Bring me something valuable, something I can verify independently, and we'll discuss terms. Relief flooded her face. I could do that. Tomorrow. Not here, Dom specified. The cafe across from Berger and Schmidt. 2 p.m. She nodded, finishing her martini in a single swallow. Dom, for what it's worth, I am sorry. Not just because things turned out badly, but because what we did was wrong. Save the performance for the authorities, Dom said coldly. They might find it convincing. As Audrey left, Dom remained at the table, ordering a whiskey he had no intention of drinking. The evening had confirmed his assessment. Preston was vulnerable, and Audrey was positioning herself for survival. The final phase of his plan could now begin. He texted Radu, Audrey offering cooperation, leverage increasing, prepare final documentation. The dismantling was nearly complete. Preston's professional edifice was crumbling. Audrey's calculated betrayal was in motion. All that remained was to ensure justice was fully served, not just to Preston's business operations, but to everyone who had participated in Dom's abandonment, including the friends who had turned it into a game. The next day, as Dom prepared for his meeting with Audrey, his phone buzzed with an urgent text from Radu. FINMA raiding Preston's office now. Meyer cooperating with authorities. Get to safe location immediately. Dom smiled grimly. Events were accelerating faster than anticipated, likely because Preston, feeling cornered, had made some desperate move. Now the endgame would unfold in hours rather than days. Rather than heading to the cafe to meet Audrey, Dom made his way to Radu's office. It was time to execute the final phase of his plan, a phase that would ensure that everyone who had participated in his abandonment faced appropriate consequences. Justice, not revenge, had always been his goal, and justice was about to be served. Chapter 7. Collapse. The headquarters of Zurich Capital Partners occupied a discreet but impressive building near the financial district. Dom, dressed in a conservative suit that projected financial authority, approached the reception desk with confident purpose. Dominic Valente to see Otto Reinhardt, he announced, using his real name for the first time in Switzerland. He's expecting me. The receptionist made a call, then directed Dom to a private elevator. In the 3 weeks since his identity revelation to Preston, Dom had systematically accelerated the dismantling process. The FINMA raid had been just the beginning. A cascade of regulatory inquiries, investor withdrawals, and construction halts had followed, unraveling Preston's Swiss operations with breathtaking speed. Reinhardt greeted Dom with the guarded respect one reserves for a dangerous adversary. Mr. Valente, your message indicated this meeting was urgent. It is, Dom confirmed, taking the offered seat. Events are moving quickly, and I believed you deserve the courtesy of direct information. Given your role in those events, that's considerate, Reinhardt replied with dry understatement. Dom placed a flash drive on the desk between them. This contains documentation of every questionable aspect of Preston Whitfield's Swiss operations, including the misappropriation of Zurich Capital's investments, fraudulent permit applications, and bribes paid to officials. Reinhardt stared at the drive without touching it. Why give this to me rather than the authorities? The authorities already have most of it, Dom explained. This provides additional context that might help your firm distance itself from Whitfield's activities. I have no desire to see legitimate investors dragged down with him. A curious sentiment from the architect of his destruction. Dom shook his head. I didn't destroy Preston Whitfield. He laid the foundation for his own downfall by building on corruption and fraud. I merely accelerated the inevitable collapse. Reinhardt finally picked up the drive, turning it thoughtfully in his fingers. And what do you want in return for this? Courtesy? Your support in one specific matter, Dom said. When Whitfield's assets are frozen and litigation begins, I want your firm to support my claim to recover funds that were stolen from me. The seed money that launched the Belvedere project. Understanding dawned in Reinhardt's eyes. This is personal for you. It began that way, Dom acknowledged. Now it's a matter of justice. After leaving Reinhardt, Dom checked his secure phone. 6 missed calls from Audrey, increasingly frantic, after he'd failed to appear at their scheduled meeting. 1 text message from Flynn, whatever your price, name it. This can still be resolved. Too late for negotiations. Dom had spent the morning activating the final pieces of his plan. Anonymous tips to Swiss journalists about the FINMA investigation. A detailed disclosure to Interpol about Preston's pattern of intimidating opponents. And most satisfyingly, a comprehensive dossier delivered to each of the Belvedere investors, detailing exactly how their money had been misused. Dom's phone rang, Radu, with an update. Swiss police have issued a detention order for Whitfield, the financial consultant reported. He attempted to access restricted accounts this morning, triggering alerts. They're searching for him now. And Audrey, still at the Victoria Jungfrau, but she's packing, appears to be preparing for hasty departure. Dom considered this. Have you secured the documentation from her room? My associate retrieved it an hour ago. Hotel staff are remarkably cooperative when presented with official-looking credentials. Excellent. The documentation, extensive financial records Audrey had secretly copied from Preston's private files, would provide the final links in the chain of evidence. Dom's next stop was the Berger and Schmidt office, where Heinrich had called an emergency meeting. When Dom arrived, the atmosphere was tense with suppressed excitement. Dominic, Heinrich exclaimed, have you heard? The Belvedere developer is under investigation for fraud. The police were just here asking questions about our consulting work. I'm aware, Dom said calmly. What do they want to know? Whether we had observed any irregularities in the approval process. Of course, I directed them to your reports highlighting the structural concerns. Heinrich's expression turned concerned. This won't create problems for the firm, will it? We acted in good faith throughout. The firm will be fine, Dom assured him. In fact, Berger and Schmidt may benefit from being seen as the ones who identified legitimate safety issues that others overlooked. As his colleagues discussed the scandal's implications, Dom quietly gathered his personal items. His work at the firm was complete, both his professional contributions and their unwitting role in his larger plan. Heinrich, Dom said as the meeting concluded, I need to take a few personal days. Family emergency. Of course, Heinrich agreed readily. Take whatever time you need. And Dominic, thank you for your integrity in this matter. Lesser architects might have looked the other way. Dom nodded his thanks, feeling a twinge of guilt for using the good-natured Swiss firm in his scheme. He left a letter of resignation in his desk drawer to be discovered after the dust settled. Outside, Dom checked his secure phone again. A message from his surveillance team. Subject W attempting to leave hotel via service entrance. Intercept in progress. Dom headed immediately to the Victoria Jungfrau, arriving in time to witness the quiet drama unfolding at the side of the elegant hotel. Two plainclothes police officers were escorting Preston to an unmarked car, his face a mask of cold fury. A small group of hotel staff watched from a discreet distance. Dom remained in his vehicle, observing as Preston was driven away. One phase complete. Now for Audrey. Rather than entering through the lobby, Dom used his knowledge of the hotel's layout to access the residential wing through a side entrance. The keycard he'd obtained through Radu's connections granted him access to the executive floor where Preston's suite was located. Outside the Imperial Suite, Dom paused, listening. From within came the sounds of frantic movement, drawers opening and closing, the rustle of clothing being packed. He knocked firmly. Housekeeping, he called, disguising his voice with a German accent. The movement inside stopped. After a moment of silence, Audrey's voice came through the door, strained with tension. Not now. Come back later. Security matter, madam. Must enter immediately. Another pause, then footsteps approaching. The door opened just enough for Audrey to peer out, her expression shifting from annoyance to shock as she recognized Dom. Before she could slam the door, he pushed firmly into the room. Hello, Audrey. Going somewhere. The suite looked like a hurricane had hit it. Clothes strewn across the bed, half-filled suitcases open on the floor, papers scattered across the desk. Audrey backed away, her composure cracking. Where's Preston? She demanded, glancing nervously toward the windows as if contemplating escape. Being processed by Swiss police, I imagine, Dom replied, closing the door behind him. Financial crimes, corrupt practices, potentially witness intimidation. The usual. I had nothing to do with that, she said quickly. I was just. Save it for your statement. Dom cut her off. The authorities will be here shortly. They're quite interested in the offshore accounts you helped establish. Audrey's face drained of color. You set me up. No, Audrey. You set yourself up the moment you decided to leave me stranded in Romania. Dom surveyed the chaos of the suite. Planning a quick exit? That rarely looks good to investigators. She moved to the minibar, hands shaking slightly as she poured herself a drink. What do you want from me, Dom? Money? I can get you money. Interesting offer, considering your accounts are likely being frozen as we speak. I have access to accounts the authorities don't know about, she countered. Emergency funds. Enough to disappear. Start over somewhere new. Dom smiled coldly. Like I had to do? After being abandoned without resources in a foreign country. That was different, she insisted. You had your career, your skills. You could rebuild, as you're about to discover for yourself. Dom checked his watch. The police should be arriving for you in approximately 20 minutes. I wanted this private moment first, to see the realization in your eyes. Audrey's expression hardened, survival instincts kicking in. You think you've won? That this is justice? Preston has contingency plans, people who owe him favors. This isn't over. For Preston, it's very much over, Dom corrected her. His Swiss operations are dismantled. His investors have abandoned him. His political connections are distancing themselves to avoid the splash damage. He's finished in Europe. And me? Am I finished too? A hint of the old Audrey emerged, calculating, pragmatic. That depends on your choices in the next few hours, Dom said simply. Cooperate, and you might emerge with some semblance of a future. Fight, and you'll go down with Preston. She studied him, searching for leverage. What happened to the man I married? The Dom I knew wouldn't do this, destroy people, no matter what they'd done. He was left on a dark road in Romania, Dom replied. The man who walked out of that experience is different. You created him, Audrey. You and Preston and your friends who thought it would be funny to abandon someone in a foreign country. At the mention of her friends, something flickered in Audrey's eyes, perhaps concern for her accomplices. Naomi and the others were just following along. They didn't understand what was really happening. Another lie, Dom said dismissively. I have the text messages, Audrey. The planning, the jokes at my expense, the celebration after you left me behind. Everyone participates. Everyone faces consequences. A knock at the door interrupted them. Firm, authoritative. Police. Open the door. Dom nodded toward the door. Your escort has arrived. Audrey's veneer cracked entirely, desperation flooding her features. Dom, please. Whatever you think I deserve, I can't go to prison. I can't. You should have thought of that in Romania, he said without emotion. Let's see how you get back from this. He opened the door to reveal two Swiss police officers, a man and a woman, both with the serious demeanor of financial crimes investigators. Audrey Valente, the female officer asked. Dom stepped aside. She's all yours. As the officers entered to formally detain Audrey, explaining her rights in precise English, Dom exited the suite. In the elevator down to the lobby, he allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Preston detained. Audrey facing charges. The financial and regulatory consequences of their actions catching up with them. Justice was being served, but it wasn't complete. Not yet. Dom's next target was the group of friends who had participated in his abandonment. Naomi, Veronica, and Brooke. Through Radu's investigative work, he had tracked their movements since Romania. All three had returned to their lives in America, apparently unconcerned about the man they had left stranded. In his apartment, Dom opened his laptop and executed the final phase of his plan. 3 separate emails, each containing evidence of the recipient's participation in his abandonment along with their complicity in Preston's questionable business practices, were delivered simultaneously. One to Naomi's employer, an investment firm with strict ethical guidelines. One to Veronica's husband, who was unaware of her relationship with Flynn during the Romanian trip. And one to the board of the charitable foundation Brooke chaired, with documentation of how she had helped launder Preston's payments to corrupt officials. It was precise, targeted justice, not designed to destroy their lives completely, but to impose consequences proportional to their actions. Each would face personal and professional reckonings that would force them to confront what they had done. As Dom finished sending the emails, his secure phone rang. Radu again. Preston is being formally charged, the financial consultant reported. Audrey has been detained, but is already offering to cooperate for leniency. The authorities are particularly interested in her knowledge of the offshore accounts. And the documentation we provided? Being reviewed by prosecutors now. They're impressed with its thoroughness. Dom nodded, though Radu couldn't see him. What about my funds? The recovery process has begun. With Reinhardt's support and the clear paper trail showing the money was taken from your accounts without proper authorization, prospects are good for substantial recovery. Not everything. Legal fees and frozen assets will complicate matters, but enough. Thank you, Radu, for everything. After ending the call, Dom stood at his apartment window, watching night fall over Interlaken. The mountains were dark silhouettes against the indigo sky, eternal and unmoved by human dramas. 1 month had passed since his encounter with Audrey at the charity gala. In that time, he had systematically dismantled the life she and Preston had planned to build on the foundation of his destruction. It wasn't revenge, at least not entirely. Revenge would have been crueler, more personal. What Dom had orchestrated was the inevitable consequence of their actions, accelerated and focused. He had created a structure of justice, elegant in its design and execution. His phone buzzed with a text message. Turn on Swiss News Channel. Dom found his remote and switched on the television. A breaking news banner ran across the bottom of the screen. American developer arrested in major fraud investigation. The camera showed Preston being escorted from a police station to a transport vehicle, his face grim, refusing to answer reporters' questions. The reporter explained in German that the investigation involved multiple properties, offshore accounts, and corrupt municipal officials. The camera panned to show Eduard Meyer being led to a separate vehicle, head bowed in shame. Dom watched silently, feeling no triumph, no vindication, only a quiet certainty that balance was being restored to the world. Actions had consequences. Betrayal carried a price. His phone rang again, an unknown number this time. Dom answered cautiously. Mr. Valente? A woman's voice, professional but warm. This is Anna Keller with the Swiss prosecutor's office. We'd like to schedule a formal interview regarding your evidence in the Whitfield case. Of course, Dom agreed. I'm at your disposal. Your cooperation is greatly appreciated. The documentation you provided has been instrumental in building our case. After arranging the interview for the following day, Dom poured himself a small glass of whiskey, his first real drink since the night at the Romanian vineyard. He raised it in a silent toast to the mountains outside his window, to the long journey from that dark road to this moment of justice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, formal statements, legal proceedings, decisions about his future. But tonight, Dominic Valente allowed himself to acknowledge that he had done what he set out to do. He had survived. He had rebuilt, and he had ensured that those who had betrayed him faced the consequences of their actions. Not revenge, justice. Chapter 8, Retribution. The Bern courthouse projected the solid authority of Swiss justice. All polished wood, brass fixtures, and meticulous order. Dom sat in a private consultation room, reviewing his statement with prosecutor Anna Keller, a precise woman whose intelligence showed in her careful questions and thorough preparation. Your testimony is crucial to our case, Mr. Valente, she explained. The financial documentation provides evidence of wrongdoing, but your personal experience connects the dots between Mr. Whitfield's business practices and his character. Dom nodded. Understand, and I'm prepared to testify fully. Good. She closed her folder. Mr. Whitfield's attorney has requested a meeting with you. We are not obligated to accommodate this, of course. Dom raised an eyebrow. What does he want? Presumably to negotiate. Mr. Whitfield's situation is precarious, but not entirely hopeless. With the right cooperation, he might avoid the most severe penalties. Dom considered this. And my wife? What's her status? Ms. Valente is being very cooperative, Keller said diplomatically. She has provided substantial information about offshore accounts and questionable transactions. In exchange, she is seeking consideration during charging and sentencing. Has she implicated others besides Preston? Yes. 3 American women who apparently participated in your abandonment and subsequently assisted with financial transactions. We've notified American authorities, though prosecution across jurisdictions becomes complicated. Dom nodded, satisfied that the net was closing around Naomi, Veronica, and Brooke as well. I'll meet with Preston's attorney. I'm curious what he has to say. An hour later, Dom faced Marcus Gerber, a stern Swiss lawyer who represented Preston's rapidly diminishing interests. My client recognizes the unfortunate nature of your history. Gerber began, his English precise and formal. He wishes to make financial restitution and avoid protracted legal proceedings that would benefit neither party. Interesting, Dom replied. And what form would this restitution take? Gerber opened a folder. Full repayment of all funds removed from your accounts, with interest. Additional compensation for hardship and inconvenience. And Mr. Whitfield's withdrawal from any business ventures that might compete with your professional interests. In exchange for your withdrawal as a witness in the criminal proceedings, limited to charges directly related to your personal experience. Mr. Whitfield would still face regulatory consequences for other matters. Dom leaned back, studying the lawyer. Your client abandoned me in a foreign country, stole my money, and attempted to destroy my career. Now he wants to buy my silence. He wishes to resolve matters efficiently, Gerber corrected. The funds are already in escrow as a gesture of good faith. Dom smiled slightly. Tell your client I appreciate his offer. I'll consider it and respond through Prosecutor Keller. After Gerber departed, Keller returned, eyebrows raised in question. An interesting proposal, Dom acknowledged, but insufficient. What would be sufficient, Mr. Valente? She asked, studying him carefully. Dom considered the question. What did he truly want at this point? The money was already being recovered through legal channels. Preston's operations were dismantled. Audrey was facing consequences. Justice was proceeding without requiring compromise. Full cooperation, Dom decided. Preston provides complete information about every questionable transaction, corrupt official, accomplice. No protection for anyone involved. In exchange, I won't object to appropriate sentencing consideration. Keller nodded approvingly. A principled position. I'll convey it to Mr. Gerber. That evening, Dom received a call from Radu. There have been developments with your wife. She's made an additional offer to prosecutors. What kind of offer? Information about financial crimes unrelated to your situation. Apparently, she was more involved in Whitfield's operations than previously understood. In exchange, she wants relocation and identity protection. Dom frowned. She's afraid of someone. Who? According to my sources, some of Whitfield's business partners outside Switzerland are concerned about the extent of her cooperation. These are not people who appreciate potential witnesses. Dom absorbed this information. Audrey's situation was becoming more complicated and potentially more dangerous than he had anticipated. While he wanted justice, he had never intended to put her in physical danger. Where is she now? Secure custody. Limited outside contact. Keep me informed, Dom instructed. I want to know immediately if her situation changes. The following day brought Dom to the Victoria Jungfrau once more, this time to retrieve his personal items from a safe deposit box he'd established under his Kane identity. As he crossed the lobby, he noticed a familiar figure at the reception desk. Naomi Wells, looking significantly less polished than during their last encounter in Romania. Dom approached quietly, positioning himself within earshot as she argued with the desk clerk. What do you mean his belongings have been removed by the police? I have authorization from Mr. Whitfield himself. She pushed a document across the counter. The clerk examined it with Swiss thoroughness. This authorization predates Mr. Whitfield's detention, madam. All property has been secured by authorities pending investigation. If you wish to claim specific items, you must apply through official channels. Naomi's composure slipped. I don't have time for official channels. I need his laptop and files today. That will not be possible. Perhaps you should consult Mr. Whitfield's attorney, the clerk suggested with professional detachment. Naomi slammed her hand on the counter. You don't understand. There are documents, She stopped abruptly as she sensed Dom's presence. Turning slowly, she faced him, blood draining from her face. Dom? Where are you? How are you? Hello, Naomi, Dom said pleasantly. Looking for something important? Financial records, perhaps? Evidence of your involvement in Preston's operations. She recovered quickly, straightening her posture. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just collecting personal items for a friend. A friend currently being held by Swiss authorities for financial crimes, Dom observed. Interesting timing for your visit. Naomi glanced toward the exit, calculating her options. This doesn't concern you. Actually, it does. You see, I've provided the authorities with extensive documentation, including text messages showing your participation in my abandonment and subsequent involvement in Preston's financial arrangements. Dom stepped closer. The American FBI has been notified as well. Something about wire fraud across international boundaries. Her composure cracked entirely. It was just a joke. Romania, we never thought that there would be consequences. Dom finished for her. That's becoming a pattern with your social circle. A uniformed security officer approached, having noticed the tense exchange. Is there a problem, sir? Dom smiled professionally. No problem. Ms. Wells was just leaving. In fact, he turned to her, I believe there are some gentlemen from the federal prosecutor's office who would be very interested in speaking with you. They're just across the street. Naomi grabbed her purse and backed away. This isn't over. Actually, it is, Dom replied calmly. It was over the moment you all drove away in Romania. As she hurried toward the exit, Dom turned to the security officer. You might want to alert the authorities that Naomi Wells is attempting to leave the country. I believe there's a detention order pending. While the officer made a discreet call, Dom continued to his original destination, the hotel's secure storage area. As he retrieved his documents, he received a text from Radu. Wells intercepted at hotel exit. Tate and Montgomery under investigation in U.S. Financial net closing. Everything was proceeding as designed. Later that afternoon, Dom entered the temporary offices of the Financial Crimes Task Force, where he had been summoned for an unexpected meeting. Anna Keller greeted him with unusual formality. Mr. Valente, thank you for coming on short notice. There's been a significant development. She led him to a conference room where, to his surprise, Audrey sat at the table, flanked by two officers. She looked up as he entered, her expression unreadable. What is this? Dom asked Keller. Your wife has made a comprehensive statement implicating not only Mr. Whitfield, but several international partners in a money laundering scheme. The information is extremely valuable to ongoing investigations. Keller paused. In exchange, she's requested a meeting with you. Dom turned to Audrey. What? 2 reasons, she replied, her voice steady despite her obvious exhaustion. First, to give you this. She slid a document across the table. Signed divorce papers. I'm making no claims on any assets. Clean break. Dom glanced at the papers without touching them. And the second reason? To warn you, Audrey said quietly. Preston has connections. People who won't be touched by Swiss authorities or even American ones. People who solve problems permanently. Keller interjected. We're taking these threats seriously. Ms. Valente has provided names and evidence suggesting Mr. Whitfield has utilized extreme measures against obstacles in the past. And now I'm an obstacle, Dom concluded. Audrey nodded. They've already reached out to contacts in Interlaken. You need protection. Dom studied his wife, searching for deception but finding only genuine concern. Why are you doing this? Why warn me? Because whatever I did to you, I never wanted you dead, she said simply. And because I owe you this much, at least. Dom finally picked up the divorce papers, scanning them briefly. No claims on assets, no alimony. Complete separation. I'm starting over, Audrey confirmed. Witness protection, probably. New identity, new location. Running again, Dom observed. Surviving, she corrected. Something we both seem to be good at. Keller cleared her throat. Mr. Valente, we'd like to offer you temporary protective custody until the situation stabilizes. Ms. Valente's cooperation has accelerated several investigations, but also increased certain risks. Dom considered the offer. I'll take precautions, but I won't hide. My work here isn't finished. After the meeting concluded and Audrey had been escorted out, Keller walked Dom to the exit. Your wife's cooperation will likely result in reduced charges for her, she noted. Does that trouble you? Dom shook his head. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about consequences, accountability. She's lost her lifestyle, her identity, her future with Preston. She'll spend years looking over her shoulder. That's consequence enough. And Whitfield, he built an empire on corruption and cruelty. Now he's watching it crumble from a detention cell. Dom smiled slightly. Architecture teaches you that everything, no matter how grand, can be dismantled if you understand its structure. That evening, as Dom returned to his apartment, he noticed a sleek black sedan parked across the street. Two men watching his building with too casual attention. Preston's connections, making their presence known. Rather than showing concern, Dom walked directly toward the vehicle, maintaining eye contact with the driver. He stopped beside the car, pulled out his phone, and photographed both men and the license plate. Sending these to my attorney, Prosecutor Keller, and several journalists right now, he informed them pleasantly, along with documentation of Preston's previous problem-solving methods. If anything happens to me, it becomes front-page news and priority investigation. The men exchanged glances. The driver rolled down his window partially, just delivering a message. Mr. Whitfield has friends who are concerned about your activities. And I have friends who are concerned about Mr. Whitfield's friends, Dom replied, including people in law enforcement across 3 countries. This won't end well for anyone who escalates beyond legal channels. He stepped back from the car. Let me save you some time. I've already anticipated this approach, just as I anticipated everything else since Romania. There's nothing you can do that I haven't prepared for. After a tense moment, the driver nodded almost imperceptibly, and the sedan pulled away from the curb. Dom watched it disappear around a corner before continuing to his building, outwardly calm, though his heart hammered in his chest. Inside his apartment, Dom poured himself a whiskey and called Radu. Preston's people made contact. Visual threat only for now. Expected, Radu replied. I've activated additional security measures. And there's more news. The American authorities have detained Veronica Tate at JFK Airport. Brooke Montgomery is cooperating with federal investigators. The network is unraveling. And our financial recovery, progressing. The Swiss courts have frozen assets equivalent to approximately 80% of what was taken from you. Recovery is likely within months rather than years. Dom nodded to himself. Perfect. The following morning brought news that Preston had accepted Dom's terms, agreeing to full cooperation in exchange for Dom's neutrality during sentencing. By afternoon, the Financial Crimes Task Force had executed search warrants on 3 additional properties connected to Preston's operations, based on his detailed disclosures. Audrey, meanwhile, had been transferred to a secure location pending arrangements for her eventual placement in witness protection. The divorce papers she had signed were now with Dom's attorney, being processed through expedited channels. One by one, the components of Dom's justice were falling into place. The betrayers were facing consequences proportional to their actions. The stolen funds were being recovered. The corrupt system Preston had built was being dismantled. As December arrived, bringing heavy snow to Interlaken, Dom received an unexpected visitor at Berger and Schmidt, Gabriela Constantinescu, his Romanian colleague, who had flown in from Bucharest. I had to see for myself, she explained as they sat in a cafe near the office. When you disappeared in Romania, I was worried sick. Then I heard rumors about what happened with Audrey, and now there's news about some American developer being arrested in Switzerland. Dom smiled. It's been an eventful few months. That's an understatement. Gabriela studied him. You've changed, Dom. Had to, he replied simply. She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. I understand why, but don't lose yourself completely in this reckoning. The Dom Valente I knew was a builder, not just a dismantler. Her words resonated more than he expected. In his focus on justice, he had perhaps neglected to consider what would come after. When the last piece of Preston's empire had fallen, when the last of Audrey's betrayal had been addressed, what then? I'm still figuring that out, he admitted. Gabriella's smile was warm. When you do, remember there are restoration projects waiting in Romania. Historical structures that need someone who understands how to preserve what's valuable while rebuilding what's broken. The metaphor wasn't subtle, but it was timely. Dom found himself considering possibilities beyond Switzerland, beyond the justice that had consumed him since that dark Romanian road. "I'll keep that in mind," he promised. As Christmas approached, the final pieces of Dom's plan reached completion. Preston, facing overwhelming evidence and abandoned by his powerful friends, accepted a plea agreement that would keep him imprisoned for at least 7 years. The financial recovery process had secured most of Dom's stolen funds. Naomi, Veronica, and Brooke had all been charged with various financial crimes in the United States, their carefully constructed social and professional lives in shambles. And Audrey, now legally his ex-wife, had disappeared into the witness protection program, her glamorous life as Preston's companion replaced by an anonymous existence in some undisclosed location. Justice, methodical and complete. On the winter solstice, the darkest day of the year, Dom stood on his apartment balcony watching snow fall on Interlaken. His phone buzzed with a message from a blocked number. "It's done. Starting over somewhere new. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for what we did. You deserve better. Goodbye, Duff." He deleted the message without replying. Whatever closure Audrey sought would have to come from within herself. Dom had given her what mercy he could, warning the authorities about threats against her, not opposing her cooperation agreement. But forgiveness? That was beyond him. Some betrayals cut too deep for reconciliation. His work in Switzerland was nearly complete. Heinrich had accepted his resignation with reluctance, extracting a promise that Dom would consider consulting on future projects. Radu had transferred the recovered funds to new, secure accounts. The Swiss authorities had indicated that Dom's formal testimony would likely not be needed, given Preston's comprehensive cooperation. It was time to decide what came next. Dom opened his laptop and composed an email to Gabriella, accepting her invitation to consult on restoration projects in Romania. Not because he sought to revisit the site of his betrayal, but because there was a certain symmetry to it, returning to rebuild where he had once been broken. Then he began researching properties in Zurich. Not a temporary apartment this time, but something permanent. Something he could restore himself, applying the architectural principles he had once used to dismantle Preston's empire. The time for destruction had passed. Now came reconstruction, not of the life that had been taken from him, but of something new, something stronger, built on the lessons of betrayal and the foundation of justice. As midnight approached, Dom raised a glass to the snowy darkness outside his window. To survival, to justice, to the future he would build on his own terms, without compromise, without the weaknesses that had once made him vulnerable. Dominic Valente had been abandoned in Romania, left with nothing. He had returned from Switzerland with everything that mattered: strength, clarity, purpose, and the knowledge that some things, once broken, should never be restored. Chapter 9. Resolution. Spring came to Switzerland, transforming the snow-covered landscape into a riot of alpine flowers and verdant meadows. Dom stood in the great hall of the Hotel Belvedere, now undergoing renovation under new ownership, a consortium of preservation-minded investors who had purchased the property after Preston's downfall. The original architectural elements are remarkable, Dom observed to Heinrich, who had invited him to consult on the revised preservation plan. Maintaining them while modernizing the infrastructure will be challenging but worthwhile. Heinrich nodded enthusiastically. The new owners appreciate authentic preservation, not just the appearance of it. They specifically requested you as a consultant. Dom ran his hand along an ornate wooden banister. "I'll consider it. I'm quite busy with the Zurich property and the Romanian projects." In the 5 months since Preston's plea agreement, Dom had established a new equilibrium. He had purchased a historic townhouse in Zurich's old city, a property with good bones, but requiring extensive restoration. Exactly the project he needed to focus his architectural skills on creation rather than dismantling. He had also made 3 trips to Romania, consulting on restoration projects in Bucharest, and Sighisora. During each visit, he had stayed with Ilinka and Mihai, bringing gifts and sharing meals with the family who had helped him when he had nothing. He had even visited the small village where he had been abandoned, now just a place on a map rather than the site of his unraveling. As Dom and Heinrich completed their tour of the Belvedere, a text message arrived from Radu. Final asset recovery complete. Whitfield's Cyprus holdings liquidated by court order. Funds transferred to your account today. Legal matter now officially closed. Dom allowed himself a small smile. The financial aspect of his justice was now complete, the last of his stolen resources recovered with interest. More satisfying was the knowledge that Preston's carefully constructed financial edifice had been fully dismantled, leaving nothing for him to return to when he eventually completed his prison sentence. Good news, Heinrich asked, noting Dom's expression. Just confirmation of a project reaching completion, Dom replied. After parting from Heinrich, Dom drove to the small cafe where he had once conducted surveillance on the Victoria Jungfrau. He ordered coffee and opened his laptop, reviewing emails from clients and colleagues. His professional reputation had not only survived but flourished. His expertise in historical preservation now sought across Europe. A notification appeared, a news alert about Preston Whitfield that Dom had set up months ago. He clicked it, curious what new development had occurred. Former developer Whitfield assaulted in prison. Conditions serious. The article detailed an attack by unknown inmates at the facility where Preston was serving his sentence. Though not life-threatening, his injuries were substantial. Dom closed the article without finishing it. Whatever happened to Preston now was beyond his concern or responsibility. Justice had been served through legal channels. Anything beyond that was not his doing or his problem. His phone rang. Gabriella, calling for Bucharest. The Ministry of Culture has approved our proposal for the monastery restoration, she reported excitedly. Full funding, with you as lead preservation consultant if you're interested. That's excellent news, Dom replied. Send me the details, and I'll review them this week. And Dom, Gabriella added, her tone softening, Mihai asked when you're visiting next. He says Ilinka is planning a feast for you. Dom smiled, genuinely touched by the continued connection to the Romanian family who had helped him at his lowest point. Tell them I'll be there for the Midsummer Festival. I wouldn't miss Ilinka's cooking for anything. After ending the call, Dom sat back, reflecting on how far he had come since that dark night on a Romanian country road. The journey from abandoned architect to architect of justice had transformed him in ways he was still discovering. Some changes were obvious. A new hardness beneath his professional demeanor, a ruthless clarity about human nature, a willingness to enforce consequences that once would have troubled him. Other changes were more subtle, a deeper appreciation for genuine connections, a recognition of his own resilience, a commitment to building something meaningful from the ruins of betrayal. As Dom prepared to leave the cafe, a woman entered who momentarily stopped his breath, similar height, and coloring to Audrey, the same confident walk. For a split second, he thought she had somehow returned, perhaps seeking reconciliation or forgiveness. But it was a stranger, merely a superficial resemblance. And Dom realized with quiet certainty that if Audrey herself had walked through that door, he would feel nothing but a distant recognition, like acknowledging a storm that had once devastated the landscape, but now held no power. That evening, Dom hosted a small dinner at his Zurich townhouse for colleagues and new friends. Heinrich and his wife, Radu, and his partner, two architects from the Swiss Preservation Society. The renovated space showcased Dom's vision, blending historical elements with modern functionality, preserving what was valuable while reimagining what needed to change. Over wine and conversation, Heinrich raised his glass in a toast. To Dominic Valente, who taught us that true preservation isn't just about buildings, but about integrity. Dom accepted the toast with a grateful nod, though the irony wasn't lost on him. His integrity had indeed been preserved, but only through a ruthlessness he once would have disavowed. Later, after his guests had departed, Dom stood in his study, reviewing the architectural plans for the Romanian monastery restoration. The project represented everything he valued professionally: historical significance, technical challenges, cultural meaning. His desk phone rang. The secure line few people had the number for. Dom answered cautiously. Mr. Valente? This is Special Agent Diane Mercer, FBI. I'm following up on the Whitfield-related financial crimes case. How can I help you, Agent Mercer? We've received information suggesting Naomi Wells may have hidden assets in Switzerland before her arrest. Given your familiarity with the case, I was hoping you might have insights. Dom considered his response carefully. The dismantling of his betrayers was complete. Additional suffering served no purpose of justice. I've provided all relevant information to the Swiss authorities, he said neutrally. My involvement in the matter is concluded. Understood, Mercer replied. Just one more question. We've been unable to trace the source of the anonymous tips that triggered our initial investigation. Would you happen to know anything about that? Dom smiled slightly. I'm afraid not. Though it seems justice has a way of finding its path, doesn't it? After ending the call, Dom returned to his architectural plans. The past was settled. Justice had been served. Now his focus belonged entirely on building the future. A future structured according to his design, reinforced against betrayal, and constructed without compromise. 2 weeks later, Dom arrived in Bucharest to begin work on the monastery restoration. As his taxi wove through the vibrant streets of the Romanian capital, he reflected on how differently he viewed the city now compared to his desperate visit after being abandoned. What had once been a place of crisis was now simply another European capital where he conducted business. At his hotel, the concierge presented him with an envelope that had been delivered earlier that day. No sender information, just his name in typed letters. Inside was a newspaper clipping about Preston's assault in prison, along with a handwritten note. Some debts require more personal repayment. Consider this interest on what was stolen from you. M. Mihai. Despite his denials of connections to Romania's darker elements, the older man had apparently ensured Preston faced additional consequences beyond legal penalties. Dom studied the note, then tore it into tiny pieces, disposing of them in separate trash receptacles throughout the hotel. He had never requested such intervention, would never have asked for extrajudicial punishment. But neither would he pretend outrage at Preston experiencing a fraction of the vulnerability he had forced upon others. The following morning, Dom met Gabriella at the Ministry of Culture, where they reviewed the monastery plans with government officials. The work was precisely what he needed: complex, meaningful restoration that required all his architectural expertise and none of his recently developed skills in dismantling people's lives. That evening, over dinner at a restaurant overlooking the old city, Gabriella studied him with perceptive eyes. You seem different again, she observed. More at peace. Dom considered this. I suppose I am. Everything's been resolved. Justice served, accounts settled. And now, she asked, what comes after justice? It was the question Dom had been asking himself for months. The dismantling of his betrayers had consumed him, defined his purpose during the darkest period. With that work complete, what remained? Creation, he answered finally. Building something new. Gabriella smiled, raising her glass. To building something new, then. As they talked into the night about the monastery project, Dom felt something he hadn't experienced since before Romania. Genuine enthusiasm for the future, uncomplicated by thoughts of retribution or justice. The next day brought Dom to Mihai's home for dinner. The older man greeted him with a bare hug, making no reference to the note or Preston's misfortune in prison. Ilinka fussed over him, declaring he was too thin and piling his plate with traditional Romanian dishes. During a quiet moment, while Ilinka was in the kitchen, Dom addressed Mihai directly. I received your message. Mihai's weathered face revealed nothing. What message? Dom held his gaze. About interest payments. After a moment, Mihai shrugged slightly. In Romania, we believe true justice requires more than paperwork and comfortable cells. Some lessons must be personally delivered. I didn't ask for that, Dom noted. You didn't need to ask. Some things are understood between men. Dom didn't pursue the matter further. In truth, he felt neither guilt nor satisfaction about Preston's suffering. Only a distant acknowledgement that in some cosmic ledger, perhaps the scales had balanced a fraction more. Summer passed into autumn, and Dom divided his time between Switzerland and Romania, building his new life with the same precision he had once applied to dismantling his betrayers. His professional reputation flourished, the Valente name becoming synonymous with authentic historical preservation across Europe. On a crisp October day, exactly 1 year since his abandonment in Romania, Dom received an unexpected package at his Zurich home. Inside was his grandfather's Omega watch, the one he had left with Ilinka as collateral for his room that first desperate night. Attached was a note in Ilinka's handwriting. A man should have his family treasures. The debt is paid many times over. Ilinka. Dom held the watch, memories of that night flooding back. The hunger, the confusion, the dawning realization of betrayal. How far he had come from that broken man. That evening, Dom stood on the balcony of his restored townhouse, watching the lights of Zurich reflect on the lake. His phone buzzed with a text from Heinrich. The Belvedere renovation was proceeding beautifully, the new owners honoring the historical elements while creating something sustainable for the future. Perfect symmetry. The project that had been the focal point of his dismantling was now being properly restored, just as Dom himself had been. His secure phone rang, Radu with a final update. Audrey's new identity and location have been secured, the financial consultant reported. She's in Argentina, working as an English teacher under the name Catherine Miller. Witness Protection Program considers her case closed. And the others? Dom asked, more from completeness than genuine interest. Naomi Wells is serving 3 years for financial crimes. Veronica Tate received probation in exchange for testimony against Whitfield's American operations. Brooke Montgomery avoided charges but lost her position at the foundation. Her reputation is significantly diminished. Dom thanked Radu for the information, though it no longer held emotional significance. The justice he had orchestrated had been delivered. The consequences had been proportional to the betrayals. The ledger was balanced. As night fell over Zurich, Dom considered what came next. The Romanian monastery restoration would continue for at least another year. His Zurich property was nearly complete. Professional opportunities arrived weekly from across Europe. But beyond the work, beyond the rebuilding of his career and creation of his new home, Dom recognized the need for something more. Not forgiveness for those who had betrayed him, but perhaps a release of the cold that had guided his justice. Not forgetting, never forgiving, but moving forward. Building rather than dismantling. Creating rather than destroying. Dom returned to his study, where architectural plans for the monastery lay spread across his desk. He began sketching modifications, improvements that would honor the structure's history while ensuring its future. This was what came after justice. Not restoration of what was lost, but creation of something entirely new. Something stronger, built with the wisdom of betrayal, but not defined by it. Dominic Valente had walked away from a Romanian road with nothing. He had orchestrated justice in Switzerland, and now he would build a future that belonged entirely to him. Uncompromised, resilient, and entirely on his own terms. The circle was complete. Justice had been served, and that was enough. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.